This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Karzai says the Afghan government needs $50 billion over the next 5 years in order to rebuild and secure his war-torn country. Since the conference opened its doors this morning, $14 billion has already been pledged. The US has promised the largest amount, with more than $10 billion. But some potential donors are asking how the $25 billion already given since 2001 has been spent. Afghanistan is one of the most corrupt countries in the world, according to Transparency International. It says it's the 9th most corrupt country out of 180 it surveys. One of the $25 billion donated in the last 7 years. Aid agencies say only $15 billion has been spent, but it is difficult to know where the money has gone. That's because 70% of international donations aren't channeled through the government, so the Afghan state doesn't have control over most of the money it's requesting. And a recent survey by an independent watchdog found that for every $100 given, only $20 actually reaches the Afghans it was intended for. Tim Friend reports.
The plush meeting halls of the Paris Conference Centre are a far cry from the poverty and desperation of the Afghan people. But this could be a crucial turning point in their history. As the donor countries assembled, there's a sense of a new determination to overcome the barriers that have prevented help reaching those who need it most. Well, amid tight security, the donor nations are now locked in meetings here behind me. There'll be some tough questions for Hamid Karzai, namely, can he clamp down on corruption and make the aid work more effectively? President Karzai has told Al Jazeera that he wants to wipe out the poppy crops that are fueling the Taliban resurgence. But he will have a hard job convincing skeptical delegates here.
Our vision for Afghanistan is achievable. However, we should be aware of the obstacles in our path. Security continues to be our biggest challenge, without which progress on every other objective that we have will be either difficult or sometimes impossible.
In Afghanistan, aid work is battling against a lack of coordination and a lack of trust in the Afghan leadership to carry out its role effectively. Publicly, the French president acknowledged the difficulties.
We need to mobilize our efforts to pursue the pledges made in London in January 2006. In this conference, I hope that we can renew our strategy for success. In March, in Bucharest, at the NATO conference, we decided a global response was needed.
Afghanistan wants $50 billion for a 5-year development plan. It won't all be forthcoming immediately. The figure is likely to be closer to $15 billion. Afghan members of parliament are frustrated with the lack of progress. Speed is now essential. 33% of Afghans do not have enough to eat. Tim Friend, Al Jazeera, Paris.
Aid agencies say that much of the money given by international donors is tied to security rather than humanitarian work. That means relatively peaceful areas can lose out. Now, some provincial governors are saying that poor Afghans in their region are turning to the Taliban for financial help. Our reporter Hashim Albara has been to Bamiyan, where many say they are yet to see any aid at all.
Empty niches in a cliffside, the enduring image of Bamiyan to the outside world. They contain 2 giant Buddha statues blown up by the Taliban in 2001. The Taliban are gone now, but Bamiyan's problems remain. Local people had hopes their city, marginalized for centuries, would be reconstructed with money from the international community. This is the center of Bamiyan city. The government promised 6 years ago to make this place a top tourist destination with modern infrastructure. But words were not followed by deeds. And the question now, why has the government failed so far to deliver on its promise? Habiba Sarabi, the governor of Bamiyan, is very critical of the international donors. She says they care only about the places where the Taliban are active.
Aid is following the security policy. Where there is conflict, war, problem, of course the international agency or international community and the coalition force wanted to have access to that area. So they are putting a lot of money to that area.
But the local population blames the Karzai government for doing little to improve the livelihood of the Hazara people.
If the prices keep going high and no jobs are provided, people will either become bandits or they will kill to get money or may join other armed groups. In any ways, they will have to act.
Here, infrastructure is totally non-existent. There is no electricity, no sanitation, no roads. The only paved road links this makeshift airport with the governor's offices. People have to walk for hours to get drinking water. This man is telling me that people get sick because of the contaminated water. In Bamiyan, people are upset with the international NGOs.
Instead of moving forward, Bamiyan is lagging far behind. All the money that comes here is spent on NGOs' big cars and a luxury lifestyle for their staff. They've done nothing for the poor people of Bamiyan.
Poor and living in a city with no infrastructure, the Hazara are desperate to see a major change in their lives. But 7 years after the fall of the Taliban, that prospect looks as remote as ever. Hashim Al-Barra, Al Jazeera, Bamiyan.
تباينت ردود الفعل بشأن الخطوة الفرنسية الرامية لفتح صفحة جديدة من العلاقات مع
The decision of Paris to open a new page in its relations with Damascus has generated mixed reactions. France's justification was clear, but Washington was clearly bothered. The French newspaper Le Monde viewed this decision as being in line with the Mediterranean Union project, one of Nicolas Sarkozy's major endeavors. Meanwhile, Washington believes that Paris is about to give Damascus a reward for something it did not do. The U.S. believes that Syria has not done anything to change the difficult situation in Lebanon, nor has it altered its strong ties with Iran.
The Elysee Palace is re-evaluating its relations with Syria. It wants to end what it called the policy of boycotting and isolating Syria, which was put in place due to Syria's position towards the Lebanese crisis. Damascus was punished by suspending its partnership with the European Union. However, French-Syrian relations were improved after the Doha agreement between the Lebanese rivals. The fact that Bush is approaching the end of his term in the White House has made it easier for France to dissent from American foreign policy. Sarkozy has ambitions to launch the Mediterranean Union project, which bothers his American ally. This explains why Washington expressed reservations about Paris's intentions to open a new page in its relations with Syria.
I think as time passes, and as the American administration changes, and as the regional conditions and interests change, new alliances will be formed in the near future.
The irony is that Washington, which does not oppose the indirect Israeli-Syrian peace negotiations, opposes the integration of Syria in the international community through the gates of the Elysee. This will return Damascus to its regional role, which Washington has been trying to undermine. A series of American accusations are ready to be made against Syria when needed, such as supporting terrorism, developing a secret nuclear program, making it easy for foreign fighters to go into Iraq, oppressing the Syrian nation, and interfering in the affairs of neighboring countries, including Lebanon. The French president, who invited the Syrian president to visit France on the 13th of July, must justify his invitation despite these accusations. Political observers believe that this will put Sarkozy in an awkward situation.
It is very important for the European Union to have the freedom to make decisions, especially when considering that the current American administration is about to go away. It is approaching the end of its term. Thus, it will not be able to pressure Europe to change their position towards Syria, regardless of what it does.
It seems that French and Syrian interests in the Middle East overlap. France, which will preside over the European Union for the next 6 months, can bring life back to the Syrian partnership with the European Union because the political reasons that prevented this from happening are no longer there. France also cannot achieve the Mediterranean Union project without Syria, at least from a geographic standpoint. Future economic plans within the framework of the Mediterranean Union project, such as building electric and gas lines, must pass through Syria. France used its historic role in Lebanon to advance the peace process on the Israeli-Lebanese track. The return of life to Syrian-French relations seems to bother Washington, which realizes that Europe is doing what serves their economic and political interests. The policy of Sarkozy reflects the saying, "There are no permanent friends or permanent enemies, there are only permanent interests."
Ambulance drivers in Faluja suffer daily, with only 3 ambulances running. Most ambulances were blown up in previous battles in which ambulances were targeted. And now ambulances are insufficient in meeting the needs of this spread-out city. Details with our reporter Abdel Kader al-Saadi.
سيارات الإسعاف مشهد مألوف لدى المواطنين وهي تجوب الشوارع.
It's common for people to see ambulances and hear their sirens on the streets as they make their way through traffic taking patients to hospitals. But in Faluja, there are only 3 ambulances. Most of the ambulances were damaged by explosives as they were targeted by armed groups during the battles that swept over this city. The ambulances are now parked in a place called the Ambulance Cemetery.
The cars were damaged by explosive devices. People were suspicious of the ambulances, and so they fired at them. The police helped us to transport the patients.
The cameras of Al Arabiya TV accompanied one of the ambulances late in the night. A call was sent to the Immediate Response Ambulance Center concerning a medical condition requiring transportation to the Medina hospital. We were stopped at a checkpoint and asked for our filming permit, but then we were allowed to continue on our way.
The city of Faluja needs an immediate response unit and a large number of ambulances. Right now, in the Immediate Response Ambulance Center in the city of Faluja, we have only 3 working ambulances.
Omar Mohammed was an ambulance driver. He was paralyzed 2 years ago. He was transporting a patient, and an explosive device struck his ambulance in the center of the city. He explained that ambulances were targeted after armed groups accused them of using ambulances to transport police members.
Ambulances were targeted in the city of Faluja. They only transport patients to hospitals at night.
وما كانت بس الإسعافات بالليل بس حركة الإسعافات بالليل بس.
At the Medina hospital, we met an old man paralyzed after suffering a brain stroke. His illness paralyzed him 2 years ago. He lost the ability to speak, and the only known fact about him is that he is an Egyptian national. Through our camera lens here at Al Arabiya, the citizens and the medical team called on the man's family to identify him and to return him to his home. From Faluja, Abdel Kader Saadi, Al Arabiya.
One Palestinian was martyred and 3 others were injured by an Israeli mortar shell attack on the town of Qarara in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. This raises the number of Palestinians killed by the Israeli incursion since this morning to 4, including a 9-year-old girl.
A cooling off period or military escalation? The Israeli Inner Security Cabinet expects Egypt to have the answer to this question. Egyptian efforts aimed at bringing about the cooling off period are the key. The Israeli decision gives Egypt an opportunity to succeed, though threats and vows have not been stopped for 1 second. If the Egyptian efforts fail, then the only alternative will be a military escalation.
The Israelis are not trying to achieve a cooling-off period. Rather, they are trying to justify a military operation. For a long time, Israel refused the Palestinian conditions. Rather, Israel added more conditions. Egypt is now helping the Palestinians in two ways. It is trying to prevent a wide-scale Israeli military operation in Gaza using its international contacts. It is also trying to help the Palestinians by organizing an Arab framework to guarantee the success of an internal Palestinian dialogue.
Israel wants a cooling-off period, but in its own way. It wants its soldier, Shalit, to be released, and it wants the Palestinians to stop developing their weapons and their military training. The resistance factions, including Hamas, refuse these conditions and confirm that Israel is trying to convince the Palestinians of something that is unconvincing and wants them to accept something that can't be accepted. They also say that the wide-scale military operation in Gaza will not be a walk in the park for the occupation army.
Whoever thinks that he can start a battle and at a time of his choosing and come out victorious is dreaming. The issue of the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit will be definitely used to teach the enemy a lesson that it will understand.
This aggression will have reverse results on the enemy, which will be responsible for the results of this aggression and any stupid mistakes that will be committed against our people, land, and holy places.
Will the coming period be military escalation or a cooling-off period? The answer to this question is in the hands of the two conflicting parties. In the meantime, the people here continue to suffer, which is the heart of the Palestinian plight. Egypt has not spared any efforts to bring about a cooling-off period and end the cycle of violence and counter-violence.
Hamas responded positively to the initiative as a way to express gratitude to the efforts of our brothers in Egypt. However, the decisions of the Zionist cabinet today are intended to waste time and undermine the Egyptian initiative.
Once again, will the next period be a cooling-off period or a military escalation? Past experiences show that Egyptian officials have never gotten tired or bored of exerting efforts towards ending violence. However, the two sides in the conflict have all the choices and possibilities in their hands. Meanwhile, the citizens are anxiously anticipating for what will come next. The answer will become clearer with time.
A short while ago, our correspondent in Gaza reported that a large explosion had taken place in Beit Lahia. One Palestinian was killed and 17 others were wounded. And once again, Gaza woke up to the martyrdom of its sons. 2 resistance fighters were killed this morning during armed clashes with occupation forces. The 2 men were trying to carry out an operation against an Israeli military base. Meanwhile, attempts at establishing calm are still underway. Israel gave the talks an additional 2 weeks before carrying out its threat to lunge on Gaza. Gaza is still under a suffocating siege that has affected all aspects of life. Zuhair Sakala reports from Gaza.
The situation in Gaza today is nothing new. 2 bitter realities are still in effect, the occupation and the siege. The citizens live under a reckless occupation which practices collective punishment on a daily basis. In turn, the Palestinian resistance tries to defend the Gaza Strip with everything it has. This was obvious in the attack by 2 armed men from the Aqsa Martyrs Brigade and the National Resistance Brigade. They attacked an Israeli military base in northern Gaza. Although it was not a large-scale attack, it carried with it a clear message.
This operation is a message to the Zionist enemy. If Olmert and his pessimistic ministers meet us with threats, then we will meet them with martyrdom operations.
Then there is the bitter reality of the Israeli siege, which even controls the air that the people of Gaza breathe. The Israeli siege has put the Palestinians here in Gaza inside a prison that keeps getting tighter by the day. Perhaps the period of calm is an attempt to come out of this prison. A truce has been talked about for a long time, going through various phases and fluctuating like the tide. Israel imposes the conditions for establishing calm while preparing to expand its offensive, even though it decided to wait for the results of the Egyptian efforts. As for Hamas, they have a different perspective on Israel's intentions.
If the Israeli occupation wants calm, including lifting the siege and ending the offensives, then we are immediately ready to cooperate in a serious way so as to guarantee the higher good of our people. If it wants a confrontation, as the Zionist Inner Cabinet discussed yesterday, then we are ready to defend our people, our land, and our families.
Israel gave the truce talks 2 weeks, after which it will consider lunging on Gaza. But Israel's daily actions suggest that the coming days will not bode well, even if calm is established. Zuhair Sokala, Dubai TV, Gaza.
A house belonging to a senior Hamas terrorist blew up this afternoon, killing 4 people and injuring more than 40. There are reports that an unknown number of people may be buried beneath the home. Hamas says an Israeli aircraft attacked the house, but the IDF denies involvement. Hamas has been manufacturing bombs in the house, and there is speculation that the blast was a result of an accidental explosion in a Hamas weapons workshop. Hamas is threatening a retaliatory attack. Earlier in the day, 3 Palestinian terrorists were killed by IDF forces while trying to blow up part of the security fence around Gaza. According to the army, soldiers spotted the 3 explosives-laden men making their way toward the border fence between Gaza and Israel near Beit Lahia. A tank opened fire, killing the first man. Troops shot dead the second gunman after chasing him down on foot. The 3rd terrorist was killed in an IAF airstrike. The 3 belong to Fatah's Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. Palestinian terrorists fired tens of mortars and Qassam rockets from the Gaza Strip into Israel this afternoon. The rounds hit the Ashkelon Regional Council and Kibbutz Yad Mordechai. A 59-year-old woman in the kibbutz suffered moderate injuries when she was hit by shrapnel. A number of fires erupted from the rocket fire. Residents in the Gaza periphery were told to stay inside reinforced buildings. A Hamas spokesman said there's no hope for a truce in the wake of today's Gaza violence. He added that Israel sending a representative back to Egypt has no meaning at this point. Defense Ministry envoy Amos Gilad was due in Cairo in an effort to clarify points on a potential truce agreement that Egyptian intelligence chief Omar Suleiman had been trying to mediate in recent months. Gilad is also working for the release of kidnapped IDF soldier Gilad Shalit, who has been in Hamas captivity for 2 years. At the same time, there's growing skepticism about a ceasefire agreement with Hamas. Deputy Prime Minister Chaim Ramon said he expects that if a truce is agreed upon, Hamas would use the time to rearm and would start firing rockets back into Israel within a few months' time. The military says it is ready and prepared for an incursion into Gaza, should it prove necessary. Well, the country moved one step closer to new elections today during a meeting of the Labour Party faction in Tel Aviv. Bringing us up to date from our Tel Aviv studio is IBA's diplomatic correspondent, Leah Zinder. Leah.
Yes, hi, Laura. It was a step, but a rather hesitant one. A Labour chairman and Defence Minister Ehud Barak told his party this morning in Tel Aviv that, quote, the way things look at the present time, we will support the motion for the dissolution of the Knesset when it comes to the vote in the preliminary reading on June 25th. But as you can tell by the language, Barak is anything but keen on that move, and he made that clear today when he stressed, quote, we would prefer to see a stable government. We can translate that as Tzipi Livni taking over as Prime Minister without going to elections. But Barak said if the reality makes it necessary, then, he said, we have nothing to fear by going to early elections. Now, the truth, Laura, is that Barak has much to fear. All the latest polls have been anything but complimentary to him, and Barak, Mr. Security, as he's widely known, has nothing much to show for the security of the country, as we can see by this afternoon's events. So, and he knows that the security situation in the country will play havoc with his chances in the elections. Nevertheless, in the wake of the Talansky affair, he had no choice. It was, after all, Barak who took the lead in demanding that Olmert step down, and Barak is in danger of losing the credit for that move to the Likud, which has already threatened to bring the early election bill to the floor of the House as early as next week. Now, we were looking at Talansky last night. He arrived in the country for a family celebration, and he will return back to Israel on July 17th to be cross-examined by Prime Minister Olmert's defense team.
مخيم
Ain al-Helwa returns to calm after a tense night. Its leaders confirmed that it will not turn into a new Nahr al-Bared. Christine Habib toured the refugee camp and returned with this report.
عود على بدء مرة جديدة يعود مخيم عين الحلوة الصيداوي إلى واجهة الأحداث.
A return to the beginning. Once again, Ain al-Helwa refugee camp in Sidon confronts another incident. A man wearing this explosive belt entered the camp. This is the suicide bomber who was identified and whose disguise was ruined. He is shown in these pictures, which were distributed by the Guidance Administration. He was carrying a belt with 2 kilograms of TNT and 1 kilogram of metal pellets. This security breach was not the first or the last in the Ain al-Helwa archives. Yesterday evening, there was security tension in the camp. The latest was gunshots which were fired at someone called Jamal al-Hassanain in the Tawariq neighborhood, where he was martyred. Meanwhile, it was learned that Hassanain and his brother were arrested by the army 2 weeks ago. New reports indicate that he was a former member of the Ansar gang. This was denied by the Palestinian leadership.
The incident involved a person whose affiliations are unknown. We also don't know who fired the gunshots. There could have been personal problems or family differences. We don't know yet what the specific reasons were.
This individual does not belong to any Palestinian faction.
He doesn't belong to the Ansar gang?
He doesn't belong to any faction. He is a laborer. He does not have any political relationship with any Palestinian faction.
Do you think this was just an isolated incident?
It needs to be investigated.
The security tensions have put a dark cloud over the residents of the camp, who do not hide their concerns about what is happening. They say that whenever they hear the sound of just one gunshot, they hurry to close their shops and return home. Their fears are justified. Recently, a prominent security leader warned against attempts to create a Nahr al-Bared II in Ain al-Helwa. What strengthened this was discussions over what is called the presence of strangers.
It is impossible for Ain al-Helwa to become another Nahr al-Bared, not internally or externally.
There is the presence of strangers in the camp.
Two people were present, but they left the camp about 1.5 months ago. 2 Saudis left the camp under pressure from the political forces in the camp. Any person who comes into the camp with a non-Palestinian agenda is undesired by the national and Islamic forces.
What prompted the Lebanese media to provide information to the security agency about the presence of strangers, specifically from the Gulf and Saudi Arabia?
That's incorrect. There are no foreigners. We challenge them to specify any place where there are strangers. Ain al-Helwa is open to journalists and to the press, and even to the security agency. There may have been 1 or 2 people present who were recently exposed. However, this does not taint the camp situation. The security situation now in the camp is stable and there is strong stability. It's better than the situation outside the camp. Now Lebanon is divided among itself. There are artillery wars inside the cities and in the capital. The security situation of Lebanon outside of Ain al-Helwa refugee camp is a lot worse than inside the camp.
To reassure the public, the Palestinian forces will hold a meeting to conduct an operation to completely comb the homes in the camp in order to confirm that there are no strangers who may pose a threat, specifically to Ain al-Helwa and to the south generally. The security tensions are not limited to the streets of the capital and the Lebanese areas. They have been transferred to the alleyways of the Palestinian refugee camps, and specifically the largest camp in Lebanon, the Ain al-Helwa camp, whose residents fear that their residential areas will become a new nest for terrorism. In this case, the refugees will be the first to pay the price. From the overlook of the Ain al-Helwa refugee camp, Christine Habib, New TV.
Christine Habib, قناة الجديد.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/Mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.